Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I'm a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, and this is Pines with Aquinas. So part of the inspiration for this YouTube channel is that if you could get a beer with Thomas Aquinas, sit down, talk about something philosophical or theological or otherwise cultural, like what would you say? What type of questions would you ask? And so in this episode, I thought that we could ask how you respond to angry communiques, whether that be by email or a Facebook message or something on Twitter. When you read something and it really stirs you up, and immediately you start thinking about how you're going to formulate your witty, snappy response. What would St. Thomas say to that? What kind of counsel would he give, and how would he direct us on a course towards holiness, both in our own life and in the lives of those with whom we commune on these platforms? So let's, grab a pint, sit down with St. Thomas, and get after it. Here we go. All right, so people talk a lot about how the current state of discourse is not so good. We don't need to dwell on that. I don't know that discourse has ever been great. People like to think there were golden ages or there were especially terrible ages, so that way they can, stand to benefit or stand to lose by comparison. So whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, whatever it is, a lot of us like to compare to past ages. There's a philosopher who says there are no good or bad times, there are just perilous times. And I think that's borne out in our experience at present. So I don't know that we can draw too much consolation or encouragement from comparison, but I think that we can conduct ourselves in this present evil age in a way that comports with the glory of God and the salvation of souls. But I think it's perilous, right? Because our first instincts are not always perfect when it comes to formulating responses and sending them off. So in order to maybe structure the discourse a little bit, let's talk first about fraternal correction, and then let's just get into some super practical tips as to how we can do this well, or just simply do this better. So first, when we were novices, we talked about fraternal correction, or we were told about fraternal correction and encouraged to practice fraternal correction. Fraternal correction is described by St. Thomas as an act of beneficence, which is good doing. And he thinks that that's kind of the exterior dimension of charity. So when he talks about charity, he describes the virtue itself, and then he describes some of its interior dimensions, namely joy, peace, and mercy. And then he turns in what follows to its exterior dimensions, namely beneficence, alms deeds, and then fraternal correction. And then in that treatise in the Summa, he goes on to describe a variety of sins opposed to charity. But it's awesome that he talks about fraternal correction specifically under the rubric of love. Okay, so this is about love. Everything that we do ought ultimately be about love. So when we were instructed, when we were encouraged to practice fraternal correction, we were told to pose 3 questions as we approach the encounter. First, does this thing matter? Okay, I think that's a good one, because there are a lot of things out there, and not all of those things matter. All right, so people are going to get into super heated debates as to whether Popeye's chicken or Raising Cane's chicken is better. I don't think that you need to enter that debate. You don't need to enter that fray. I mean, if you're from Kentucky or from northern Alabama and these things for you are prized beyond all others, okay, maybe you enter that fight. But if you're coming at it from an Ohio perspective, you can probably leave that be. All right, so does it matter? Because some things will require of you a certain response. So if you're in a setting where you're the only Christian, somebody starts attacking the faith, and those who are present who don't know otherwise could stand to be scandalized by the discourse, it's time for you to step it up. But in a lot of circumstances, it's not up to you, and it's fine. You don't have to rebuke every error. You don't have to correct every mistake. So that's the first. Does it matter? Second is, can it change? Okay, so it might matter, and it might fall within your area or zone of responsibility, but that doesn't also mean that you're going to do it every time. So for instance, you're a parent, you've corrected your children on 1,000 things 1,000 times. Now they're 25, they're coming back to visit, they're only going to be in the house for 2 days. Should you pick up the old refrain? No. Well, I leave it to you to decide. I wouldn't, because your kids are just going to associate being at your house with being nagged. At a certain point, you need to change the tune, so that way they look forward to it. They look forward to bringing their kids to it, so that you can get to know your grandchildren and don't have to experience perilous isolation for the rest of your livelong days. Sorry that got dark. Turning it up or turning it over. So we have to ask, can it change? And we ask this question not with a spirit of despair, because we don't think that anything in the world can change, because everyone is just hell-bound and disastrous. We ask this with a spirit of hope, because God might be calling us to be an instrument of change in this person's life. And if that is the case, then he's going to, when he wields us as his instrument, he's going to infuse in us a power to carry it out, right? To be an instrument of peace. Then the third one is, do I love? Okay. And whenever we answer this question, it's going to be like, kind of, or I hope to love better. We have to be honest about the fact. But we seek to be motivated by love, or we try to be motivated by love. Because if it's just a matter of being like, this guy needs to know what's up, yeah, then it's probably not going to go too terribly well. But if we're like, I really want this person to know the truth, right? To embrace the good, to revel in the beauty that is offered. And like in this current moment, it seems like there are certain obstacles to that. And I think that I might be, whatever one would say, I might be called to help the person address them. Okay, so think about it in terms of communion, think about it in terms of friendship, think about it not so much in terms of like condescension or giving somebody something that they don't have, as like coaxing the good out of the other, helping the other to draw on his or her native resources by the grace of God so as to become who he or she is meant to be. All right, so now we're talking about responding to emails or Facebook messages or Twitter posts or whatever it is, tweets. One calls them tweets. Oh my gosh. I'm 34, but I act like I'm 1,000 sometimes. So pardon me. So within the setting then, a fraternal correction, how do I weigh in? So how do I respond? First thing I would say is give a sympathetic read. All right? Give a sympathetic read. Now, the person might be saying something that's crazy, something that's stupid, something that is evil, okay? But recognize the fact that at first glance, you're probably going to exaggerate the rhetoric and the dialectic such that it appears worse than it in fact is. So I would say just try from the outset, on the first go, to give a sympathetic read. There are very few nihilists out there, bomb throwers and wreckers, people who are just hell-bent on watching the world burn. So everyone, I would argue, everyone is motivated by some perceived good. They're on the track. They're in pursuit of something that they think to be good for them and maybe even for other people. You're going to want to try to suss out what that is, what actually drives this person, because when you can sympathize with what drives the person, then you're better able to read what it is that they're saying. All right. I think that you just try to frame whatever they're saying within a setting of sympathy. Okay. How can you do that practically? I would say read it once, set it down, take a little distance, and then read it again. Okay? So read it once, set it down, and then read it again. And in the interim, I would say try to render it in your own words. This doesn't have to be like a long, drawn-out exercise. But it's like, okay, crazy town, psycho person just said this. It sounded like this, and this. Could that possibly be the case? Are there intelligent people in the world who would say that? Sometimes the answer is, well, maybe, which is astonishing, but it's what it is. So try to render it in your own words and then return to it and then check it against the way in which you've interpreted. So that's the first. You're just trying to read the thing. And it's often said of St. Thomas Aquinas that he's able to render the arguments of his opponents in terms better than they themselves could. So St. Thomas read with great sympathy. Why? Well, because he was motivated by the truth. He wanted to find the truth wherever it was to be discovered, okay? And he often quotes this line from St. Ambrose that whatever truth, regardless of by whom it is said, if spoken, is spoken or is inspired by the Holy Spirit, okay? So the Holy Spirit is at work, all right? And there are elements of grace and salvation without the bounds of the visible church, and so we're going to be on the lookout with this kind of cosmic sympathy as a way by which of affirming what is true, good, and beautiful out there. So that way, we can be in communion with those who want to kind of deal in these exchanges. All right, so sympathy. Second, I would say write a draft response, okay? And I would emphasize the word draft, all right? So write a draft response. It was said of General George Meade. Nope, it was said of Abraham Lincoln that when General George Meade won the Battle of Gettysburg but didn't pursue his enemy beyond whatever river it was, and now I've forgotten. I'm from Pennsylvania. This is an embarrassment. And he didn't pursue the enemy so as to destroy them, that Lincoln actually wrote a letter announcing his decommission, right, announcing that he was going to fire him. And then he just filed that letter. But he needed to write it, all right? He needed to get it out there so that way, he could process it. Now, eventually he did fire Meade. And then Ulysses S. Grant came in and killed an incredible amount of people. And suffered an incredible amount of casualties. But that's besides the point. So write a draft response and then sit on it and then revisit it. I would say you shouldn't send emails past a certain time and before a certain time. Because if you're formulating emails when you're tired, or if you're formulating emails when you're lonely, okay, so there's those lonely hours of the morning where the birds begin to sing right about 3:45, 4 a.m. And if you're up, burning the midnight oil, or if you just can't sleep and you're firing off emails, then things can tend to get weird and they can come off sideways. So I would say maybe set some bounds for yourself. I don't respond after X time. I don't respond before Y time. Try to do it, like within business hours, because those tend to be the hours of sanity. And then if you want, if it's an especially important thing, have a friend look at it. I don't think that you need to be told that. None of us need to be told that, because a lot of us just do it instinctually. But it's good to have a second set of eyes. I have a couple of very good friends, one of whom is more cautious than I am, and one of whom is more, what would one say, rash than I am, or maybe I would say courageous than I am. And I will sometimes have both of them look at a thing, because then I can kind of triangulate in between their responses. The one will say, yeah, you might want to soften this, that, and the other word. And the other one would be like, guns blazing, make it bolder, don't back off your claim. It's like, okay, all right. So it just gives me a sense as to where I fit, or as to where I lie. So give a sympathetic read, write a draft response, and then sit on it. And then I would say also try to shape the reception of the thing that you're trying to communicate. We're all mindful of the fact that like vocabulary and grammar can be ambiguous, insofar as when you're writing these things, whether email or Facebook or Twitter, the person can't hear your voice, they can't hear the way that you're stressing things, they can't hear the tenderness, they can't hear the sympathy, they can't hear whatever, okay? All they see is just blunt force trauma words. And I think that we're responsible for shaping that response. How do we do that? Well, first, I think that if you can address a thing in a more personal medium, right, in a more humane medium, then it's probably good to do that. So if you've been having whatever written exchanges with somebody and you're suspecting that you're spiraling off into incomprehension, just pick up the phone. All right. Now, for those of us who are below a certain age, calling somebody on the phone is like an act of violence. But I think that we should try to personalize an encounter to the extent that it is possible. Or that might just mean sending an audio message. Okay. But let them hear your voice. And try to resolve some of the sharpness or the brutality, except insofar as that sharpness is in service of the message, because some messages just need to be communicated with a kind of forthrightness. And I don't think that you should back off that. But I don't think that you want to unnecessarily offend if it will pose an obstacle to the reception of what it is that you're trying to communicate. And then, I would say that the big things to be on the lookout for are self-satisfaction and condescension. All right. So anything that smacks of smugness, anything that smacks of haughtiness, superiority, is going to shut the discourse down. All right? It's going to shut the discourse down. And I think that if we want to be of service to the other, we need to be humble. Because humility says, everything that I have from God, and I am on the lookout to receive my identity and my mission yet more perfectly from God. And I come before you, the other, as a beggar. I beg before the Lord for my life's store. And I come before you in a similar posture, not in that I'm groveling or sniveling, but in the sense that I don't come to you with a kind of swaggering self-assurance, which is bound to torpedo all of, the subsequent exchanges which follow. So I think that humility really commends the person who writes, and it commends the message that is communicated. And then the last thing I would say is just be prepared for no results. So St. Teresa of Calcutta famously says, you're not called to be successful, you're called to be faithful. And I think that's true of these types of exchanges, whether email or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that you're not always, very rarely, I think, are you going to be successful. But I think that we should approach them with the hope of a certain success, not according to a worldly standard, but according to a heavenly standard. Because the point of exchanging truths and goods and beauties is so that we can commune with them. And the only place wherein we can commune, on the basis of these things is in God, right? So if we want them, to know this truth, to enjoy this good, to revel in this beauty, then it has to ultimately be in God if it is to endure. So that's to say that, we need to love, which brings us back to fraternal correction. It has to be rooted and grounded in love. All right, so that is what I have prepared for you today. This is Ponce with Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel, push the bell, and you'll get updates when other sweet things happen. And those updates will undoubtedly be good. Also, I contribute to a podcast that is called Godsplaining, Godsplaining. I contribute to that with 4 other friars from my province, and it's sweet. And we've talked about some themes kind of adjacent to this one with some frequency. Yeah. So check out God's Planning for other pertinent topics. And then I wrote a book. That book is called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. And it's about empowering you in the choices that help you on the way to sanctity, that help you to become the saint whom God has destined you to be. And a lot of those simple decisions will be like this, like how do I respond to this email? And you'll find great principles, great arguments in that book that will, assist you in your efforts. So that's what I got for you. My prayers are for you. Please pray for me. And I'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Pints with Aquinas.